Welcome. Today, my guest is Dr. Janet Brager. Janet is a Lutheran pastor and college lecturer in religious studies and interfaith work for several decades in Los Angeles. Welcome, Janet, and thank you for sharing your story with us. Would you like to share with us what those gifts were at that time and what age you realized you had these gifts?
I was thinking about that before the interview, and I think they're just like this very intense empathy with people. Just feeling like I could sense everyone's inner feelings and that I would feel like I was floating at night. I would look out the window and I would feel like I was floating. So I always felt like there's just something that is energy that's going out and seeing and doing things, and that it was very empathetic, right? So I would know if somebody was sad. I sometimes would get images of them. I didn't really understand, of course, because I was little. And I thought that everybody does that. I was like, this is just the way things are. And I would have a hard time distinguishing between what was actually real, like really happening, and what I was sensing. So sometimes they would go, Janet, you're lying. And I'd be like, okay. I really had a hard time till maybe second grade or first grade trying to figure out if I saw a person and I had an image of something about them, was it actually happening in front of me? So really the gift was just empathy, like to a very high degree of understanding what people were feeling or seeing some of their experiences. Like a lady down the street from where we lived had a number on her arm, and she had a tree growing inside her house in the living room, this huge tree. And I just felt like she had this really deep suffering. Her name was Gertrude. And I was always wanting to be around her and comfort her. And then later, of course, as I got older, I learned that she had been in a concentration camp. And so since it was about 1957 or something, she probably had come from Germany, and her husband was really protective of her. But I didn't know that at the time. I just was feeling. And then I would see some images of her that I didn't understand. So I think there weren't any magical things, but it was this sense that outside of me was just energy that I could absorb or experience. And I just didn't know how. I just thought that's the way everyone was.
So how old were you, Janet, when you first realized that you had this empathy, that you could sense people?
Well, I think the turning point was when I realized that other people didn't. Do you know what I mean? It just was the way I was. I still am like that. But I just didn't understand that other people didn't have the same experience. I think it was more that I had to learn how to manage it as I got older. I had to understand that other people did not see other people's life experiences. And so I don't remember not having that kind of empathetic experience, but it was more like understanding everyone else did not, like everybody was not seeing the same thing that I was seeing and experiencing. The intensity of it was not the same for other people.
Your parents, how did it work with your parents? Did they understand what was happening with you? How did they relate to it when you talked to them?
I remember one time saying it to my mother. I think she might have slapped me. So I got a message from the very beginning: do not tell your parents. So I never told them. There were a lot of immigrant families in our neighborhood who had really tough World War II experiences. I mean, I just existed in my own little world and just got that message: you're weird. I don't know if anybody remembers Patty Playpell doll, but she was like a life-size doll. And she had dark hair like mine. And I had her up at the corner of the steps, and my mom was at the bottom of the steps, and she thought it was me, and she was screaming at me. And I was standing behind her watching her scream at this doll, knowing that it was the doll, not me. And my brother and sister were twins, so she was a little overwhelmed, and it was the 1950s suburbs. So I saw my mother like screaming at a doll, and then I just shut down to her. Do you know what I mean? I just shut down to my parents. Like, there were the nuns in school, they kind of understood, but I just felt lonely actually because I couldn't ever share that.
We are very quiet when we realize that people don't understand. We kind of go into our own little world. We're different or we feel different and we're not sure how to fit in. And I think that's why so many people have these gifts, might step away from them as they get older because it's like, I've got to fit into society or I've got to fit into what's considered normal. What happened with you in that sense, going to school with having this level of empathy?
Well, everyone told me all their stuff. You know, I mean, even now, people on planes tell me things. I mean, everyone who had a problem would come and talk to me. I remember that in first and second grade, and I would listen. And to me, every person was interesting. So people would tell me all their stuff, like whatever they were worried about. And I just accepted it. I didn't really think it was special. I just was like, okay, people tell me their problems, so I'll just listen. I went to Catholic school, and some of the nuns were harsh, shall we say. They kind of made me feel like anything spiritual could be really bad because they were the symbol of spirituality and they would hit us. The other part that was difficult about it was that I was also smart. So they would say certain things and I would say, oh, no, that can't be right. So then I would get in the back of the room or something. So I think, yes, as I'm talking to you, I realize it was being ostracized on one hand by all the adults. And yet at the same time, the other kids would be telling me things on the playground or in class about their parents. So it was like I understood that this was a good thing, but I couldn't really tell anyone.
But you retained your sense of self in who you were.
I did not ever lose it, but I did have to learn how to trust it out in the world. Do you know what I mean? I think I just kept a little bubble around it. And then when I was older, when I had gotten divorced and in the divorce counseling, the counselor had said, well, look, you're this really empathetic person and people are going to take your energy and you have to protect yourself. And so at that point, I realized that is when I decided to become a pastor. I was like, I have to put boundaries around this. If I'm going to have a natural empathy, and people are going to tell me things, I'm going to put myself in a role that has limits so that I don't lose myself in the interactions and that I could be a person of healing, but I could establish boundaries for myself so that it would be productive. James von Prague, the psychic, I went to one of his sessions one time and he said, oh, yeah, he'd be at a cash register and he would understand everything about the person who was a cashier, but he had to learn that he could just not say it. Okay, I'm feeling this. And he said, I would be there and I would let myself feel all the feelings and see all the things, but I just wouldn't say anything. You can't just say you're suffering from your husband, even though I could feel that at the cashier. So I think that it was me understanding it in light of other people and how to use that gift in the world, how to put some boundaries so that I did not have to respond to every single person that I was feeling their suffering.
That's the beautiful thing about you, Janet. You retained it, and that's become a part of everything that you've done in life, which is so wonderful. Instead of losing it and forgetting it, it's just to hold and use it so wisely. And I understand that. Well, my mother used to say to me when I was in my early 20s, everyone that's got a problem finds you. And so I wouldn't say it like that. I just think, well, but they've come to me to talk to me. They found me, and maybe I can help them. That's how I saw it. But I also understand that being so careful as well, because you couldn't always say what you were seeing. You had to be
Yes.
so careful. And I remember watching a woman walking into an office one day, just watching from my office window. I knew this woman, but I thought, oh my God, it's her birthday today. But she seems so alone. And it's like to go and wish her a happy birthday when I'm not supposed to know. There was such a pain there. And I eventually learned what that was because she did open up to me. but you still have to be careful. I remember having a staff member who turned up on behalf of the other staff one day and actually said to me, "Oh, can I ask you a question? We just want to know if you can read our minds." And my answer to that was, well, maybe I could, but I would only do that in a setting where you have given me permission to help you. Otherwise, no, I don't do that. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I should say with my mother though, my mother and my grandmother, we were in Ohio and there was a Roma community. And we would always, when we were older, my mom would take us to the gypsies to have them do psychics things. And that is another instance, I think, when I was in high school and I realized I didn't understand why my mother went there, but I still don't actually understand that. But I realized, oh, she's doing what I do, but I didn't read minds. I didn't do it. I would not, that was not the setting that I functioned in. But I realized, wow, other people do this. Do you know what I mean? Like they charge money. So it's not a magic trick. And I think there's some abuse there when people are, but it's not reading mind. Don't you think it's more like experiencing someone's mind? It's not reading people's mind. It's just experiencing their energy.
Feeling their energy.
Yeah.
But your mum going to the gypsies has kind of helped normalize it for you then.
Yeah. Now that I'm thinking of it, well, I always was confusing. Like, why are we going here? But, actually, when I think about it, that did probably be contradictory to her telling me that I don't know what she was doing, but yeah, it kind of put it into a normal setting as much as going to someone's house in the dark was normal. But I think, yes, you're right. But I did say, this is not just me. And I don't want to be in this setting because it doesn't feel authentic. Like, I don't think there's a crystal ball or anything on it, but I think they had like little things, objects that they used. But I realized that the way they do it was not my normal, but they were doing the same thing. But it did allow me to go throughout the rest of my life to psychics to get a reading. I still do that with people that I trust are there to be genuinely helpful.
I'm really interested why you were keen to share your story.
Because I realized that people are, in general, in the intellectual world that we live in Western culture, they are not valuing these experiences. Like if I'm in some other cultures where it's a value, it's an accepted mode of existence, where our culture has, Western culture, I don't want to generalize all that, but it's just frequently in the world right now, people are detached from this in themselves. So I think it's a way to share stories and have people understand this is real. And I think each person has it to a certain level, and that it's like the Sufi idea that at death, the veil is removed and you see what's really real, right? So it's like, well, let's lift the veil a little bit earlier so we can see. Because as a pastor, I often was at people's deathbed and they have this intuition of their life and who they are. And eventually I started thinking, wow, if you get this at the end of your life, you kind of should be keyed in a little earlier so you don't make as many mistakes or cause as much pain. You and I talked about doing prison work. And in the jail, as one of the inmates said, well, I don't have anything but the Bible, so of course I'm getting it to myself. So they have like spiritual awakening when you remove everything and you have someone like you or me kind of empathetic listening, and then you're really listening to them finding themselves. So yeah, self-estrangement, that's a good way to describe what's going on in the world right now. And so if I could share my story, and you're doing it, is so amazing because it's a group of people who says, look, this is real, and pay attention to yourself, and there are people who will listen to you.
It's why I wanted to do this series, Janet, because we're normal instead of, oh, it's so woo-woo, or they're weird or off with fairies. But I wonder sometimes if the people who think that are also people who hid what was potentially a gift that they had or still have buried inside. And some people say, well, I didn't experience anything like that. But I just wonder whether they weren't open to it at that time. I think we're all magical beings and I think we're all gifted. As you say, I think that self-estrangement is absolutely right. We have stepped away to try and fit into what's considered normal.
Yeah, and I think like what you're saying, you have to be careful what you say, because in my earlier years, I would say, well, this happened with your father and this is how you feel. And I realized people would be angry. And you can't just jump into somebody's life and say, here's the crux of your pain, because they have to have their own process. I think I learned through not to be cautious in the way that I learned as a child, but in a way of being sensitive to the fact that somehow people's pain was kind of floating even in their own self, and that it wasn't enough. I wasn't supposed to shine a spotlight on it. I was supposed to just be a friend or listen to them and let them kind of come to it themselves. But then sometimes when someone's got a pain blocked, you want to say, well, I saw your father hitting you. Did that happen? You have to hone the gift, I think.
If you could give advice to parents who have a child who's experiencing something similar, what advice would you give them right now?
The first word that comes to my mind is listen to your child. If your child is saying, I think this or I feel this, you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to say anything about it. You just have to listen. And I think be reflective listening. I mean, you have to encourage them by listening and affirming their feelings. And then I think that kids then will ask you, well, what should I do about this? I mean, once they feel that you trust their experience, then they will kind of investigate it with you. But if you try to give them too much advice, it's like watering a plant. You give it too much water, you kill it. If you don't give it. So I think it's empathetic listening. And probably, maybe in the instance of my mom, maybe she had the same feelings and she blocked them out. I don't know. Right. I mean, it could be that there's genetics or something involved in it. And maybe that was her way of having those same feelings. I really don't know. But listening and not judging, and having the kid explore that themselves, because I don't know about you, but I feel like if I'm truly empathetic, I'll eventually learn how to channel the energy.
I know of a young child at the moment who has an ability. She does communicate with relatives who passed over, and she's actually described them. The mother doesn't understand any of this, but she doesn't stop her daughter. And the child will say, oh, my mum doesn't understand this at all.
Well, I know that there's actually a study from, I think, University of Pennsylvania Medical School that says that up until about 3 or 4, somewhere around 5, that kids have a natural empathy with people who have passed, right? A friend of mine had said her husband died really young in his 40s, and she was taking the kids to school. And one of the kids that was in the car said to her, Donna, Mark told me to tell you he's okay. Mm. And just that kid felt that they could say that to her without her judging them or anyone judging them. And so I think we both believe in levels of the universe. So it may be that you're open at a certain level, your brain isn't developed enough, or whatever the neurology of it is, that we're in touch with different dimensions, and just out of necessity to live every day, we filter them out. But yeah, when she heard that from the kid in the car, she didn't judge. She didn't say, oh no, that's ridiculous. She just said, okay, thank you for letting me know. Mm. And that was enough, right? The kid said it and she said, thank you. And that was it. So
the child feels validated or listened to.
And what a powerful experience that must have been for that kid to have a dream where Mark, who she knew, spoke to her and said, tell her, I'm having a dream and I'm supposed to tell you this, or whatever she actually said. But, you don't want to invalidate that. But that kid must have had such a strong experience that on the way to school, preschool, right, they would be, I'm supposed to tell you, or whatever the exact wording was. I feel like we're just in a rich world of things that are happening that we are a little bit out of touch with.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating time to see what's going to happen, Janet. We've seen that there's so many more people who are open now or follow a spiritual path, and it's really interesting to watch their journeys.
You know, about so many people are in pain right now, and your normal coping mechanisms are not working. Then it kind of causes like a moment of despair, but maybe also it causes a moment of reaching more deeply into yourself. And maybe that's an opening, because I know that one of the things I learned later in graduate school was Carl Jung. So many people in Europe whose sons were killed during the world wars felt that their children were coming back and saying, I'm okay. And they didn't know if it was real or not. And so he started having groups. I don't know if they were really seances, honestly. I doubt if they were, but they probably got characterized that way. But he just was bringing people together who said, I felt my son was saying I'm okay. So when you think about how much pain that is to lose your child on a battlefield that you don't find or see, and that was kind of the idea that he realized that there are psychic levels. And you think about, yeah, if that happened to me and I had a loved one, I would want them to know I'm okay. And as a pastor, when I have to do all this stuff about the resurrection, I'm like, let's get off the resurrection part. Let's get back to Jesus was coming back and telling his friends, I'm okay after this horrendous death. So let's not get like overblown on the trumpets. Maybe this is actually the way things happen, that if you truly love someone and they're in pain, I mean, I've had many experiences myself where I was in pain and I could feel like someone reaching through this kind of, I don't know, like silicone love or something like that, where they were like reaching out to touch my shoulder, to touch my pain. And then I was thinking, that is really the world we live in. So maybe people need to reorient themselves in that direction. So maybe in all the pain that is around the world right now, that maybe we can shed some things that aren't working anymore, particularly some religion. Like, guys, stop saying all that stuff. There's not a hell, okay? And just to more empathetic, like open yourself to being healed and loved. That's the purpose of the universe, not power and wealth and stuff.
Janet, it's so lovely to talk to you, to hear from you. Thank you for sharing your incredible journey. It's so wonderful to know that you've held on to who you truly are and how you've used that in your life. That's so incredibly valuable. And Janet, I think you're a perfect example of that and what you've chosen to do in life. And thank you
Yes.
so much for sharing your story.
Thank you. Mwah.